Hi, everyone. I thought it appropriate to give a little bit of a preamble to today's episode. I was joined by Jake. He's the host of the Meaningful Nonsense podcast, and we had a conversation that was intended to talk about what makes Canada great. We got a little bit sidetracked here and there. Overall, we agreed about a lot of things. There was some difference, though, when we got to the topic of UBI and whatnot. I found it to be some very interesting differences we had, but nevertheless, it was an enjoyable conversation. We had actually never spoken prior to this recording, so we didn't really know what each other's stances were per se. Maybe we caught a couple clips here and there from each other's show, but it was a brand new territory that I think went pretty well. You can be the judge of that. So without further ado, here is Jake. Hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Jake. We have a really interesting conversation to get to, but before we get too deep into that, I just want you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. So my name is Jake Sweetler, and I am the host of the Meaningful Nonsense Show. And we just linked up. We connected on social media, and we thought it'd be cool for you guys to listen to our conversation, just general stuff, but also uh, what makes Canada awesome. And that's sort of what we're going to lead into today. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be on the show, and I'm happy we're doing this.
Yeah, so before we even get to any of the what makes Canada great, can you tell me a little bit about what you do on your podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, my thing is, I'm an entrepreneur, so I've decided that I want to sort of put out quirky daily things in my own life that I think are funny, but also that I think people can relate to and that people can find some meaning in. So, hence the show is called Meaningful Nonsense. It's not to be taken too seriously, but when it comes down to it, I want people to extract important information. And when I do interviews, I want people to get a different perspective in life about whatever topic it might be, and just to get overall a different perspective and some humor and laugh, and not to take yourself too seriously. So that's kind of where we're leading, and yeah, things have been going good so far. So that's kind of where we're going, and yeah, I should ask for yourself too. Kind of now that I'm on your show, I'll throw it right back at you. What led you to sort of start the Perry platform, and what do you plan to go with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And maybe we should clear up for the audience too. This is me and Jake's first time talking. So we're
Yeah,
trying to feel each other out right now as well. So, yeah, the Perry platform, I really have a passion for politics and news. And not just that, I like things like philosophy as well. You can probably tell based on my content, I juggle between all three of these things. And the real source of my inspiration was I felt like the mainstream media wasn't doing justice to a lot of these topics. They're limited to their airtime 30 minutes to go through an entire program. Each piece of the program, maybe they have 30 to 60 seconds to talk about it. That's not enough. Podcast is a vehicle that allows me to have real conversations with people about big topics, and we can go in depth in it. We can talk about the nuance, and we can really figure out what's wrong with something, what's good about it, and what solutions are. These things aren't possible in the mainstream media. And on top of that, podcasting is becoming a new method for people to absorb information. So I saw the opportunity and I took it.
yeah, and the thing is, just to add to that, and that's what makes it beautiful. I mean, this is the new media, so the fact that you're able to bring the alternative and we can get it out there, it's great. And I think people just want sort of, just from my perspective and your perspective, just a reality check, and kind of get some real information. And so that's why I think your platform's great. And yeah, I'm happy that I reached out to you, and I'm happy we're doing this.
Yeah, man. So let's just dive right into it. So today's
Let's do
theme is talking about what makes Canada great. Do you want to start with your thoughts on that?
it. Yeah, it's funny because your platform is very interesting because you do provide the alternative and kind of get to the nitty gritty of the things that I guess are serious within Canada. So that kind of led me to think about, well, okay, so what really does make Canada awesome, right? Let's put aside the things that are negative and the things that we have trouble dealing with. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I would just go right to the nitty gritty. I think the people, we can talk about the people in Canada. I think the people in Canada are really nice, and that's not a myth.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things when you come to this country. I relocated from Vancouver. I was born in Vancouver on the West Coast, and I wanted a bit of a change, and I came to Toronto, and all I felt was welcoming people, and welcoming Torontonian. So, um, I have dual citizenship. So when I go back to the States, I do see a difference in the mentality. Um, so I guess just right to the nitty gritty, I think the citizens are generally really polite, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being decent. I think there should be more decency. So that'd be the first thing. I think that people are actually really fantastic and
Yeah.
really bright generally.
Actually, I find that very interesting, the comparison with the States. Can you talk more about that? What do you feel in America that you don't feel in Canada, or vice versa?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I have part of my family from New York, so from Brooklyn and the Bronx. So it's just a different mentality. I mean, yeah, it's a there is a distinct difference. It's sort of it's more edgy. I notice. I mean, I'm only speaking from sort of the East Coast, similar to Toronto, but it just seems that the people are sort of. I mean, to be honest, I mean, New York, it's kind of rude.
Yeah.
They're a little ruder, where I think Canada, it just, that kind of is not there. You don't get that feeling. There's less of a pretension. And I think even with the election, obviously, of the current president, people are on edge. And I did notice that going back to New York, there is a bit of anxiety from the people. There's a lot of frustration, to be honest. And so there is a difference. I mean, if people, it's hard to fully describe it, but if you do go to New York or you go to different places in the States, there's a different mentality. It's sort of, I think there's an expectation of
Mhm.
a sort of a righteousness. It's a different mentality for sure.
Yeah, you can just feel it, right? It's something in the air.
That's right. That's right.
I like this point too about the elections. That's one of the things that I think makes Canada great. Is the degree of polarization really is what I would call it. In America, it's so heavily divided from what I've seen that people are starting to look at each other as enemies simply based on your political ideology, the left versus the right, and it's a toxic battle. In Canada, this dichotomy still exists, but it's way, way more watered down. People aren't at each other's throats to the degree that they are in the States, and that kind of behavior is so destructive. Really, it stems from what I think is the people feeling like they're just not being heard. In Canada, we're able to have some dialogue and some debates, but in America, it's just screaming. People aren't communicating and they're seeing each other as the other. Such a dangerous mentality. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, you nailed it. Yeah. That was kind of what I was missing in that last point. Totally. That was the thing I felt. When you go there, that you do feel this weird thing about color.
Mhm.
Like you kind of feel, like I'm white skinned, right? So you're white. So it's like you look at you like, oh, there's kind of skepticism. It is strange, and you can feel that. So when you go there, it is that tremendous polarization,
Mhm.
and it's kind of the collectivism. It really is amplified in the States. And so you've nailed it. Have you been to the States recently, or you've even been out of Canada, or no?
Yeah, I was passing through New York, but just in the airport, and the airport itself was my own anecdotal experience that I can relate to with this. The staff were extremely rude, not to me,
Yeah.
but to the people I was observing and their interactions. But in Toronto, all my interactions with airport staff have been positive, nothing negative in all my travels. So that's my
Yeah, man.
one point of
Yeah,
contrast.
yeah. I For sure, man. Yeah, I would say that when it's funny. It's complete agreement with that. I mean, when I came into New York, and I was at Penn Station,
Hmm.
and I was treated so rudely by the woman at the counter, and it was just like there is a sense of unhappiness. Like I really felt a kind of a lingering thing, and I think you're right. I think it is a tremendous polarization, and the fact that in Canada it's sort of middle ground to work with. Because I have friends that are on all different parts of the political spectrum, but it
Hmm.
never gets. And I think that's the beauty of Canada. Actually, it never gets too serious.
Hmm.
Like it doesn't get that heavy.
Yeah, it's
Um,
true. I have friends on the left, the right, and the center, but
yeah,
in America, from what I'm gathering,
yeah,
it's very different. People are actually advocating for you not to do that. That you should just dig deeper into your tribe and remain like that.
yeah, yeah. And that's why I think something that you do. Obviously, you do it for the Canadian audience, and obviously, American audience can tune in too. And part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I'm trying to help bridge the gap a bit. Because you're totally right. It's if you think this way in the States, if you think a little bit more left or a little bit more right, people are not even connecting. They're not even talking,
Mhm.
and that's not a myth. And you can sort of it sort of trickled down into society. So if I had to tell you within the last several years, kind of what it's become, there is a tremendous difference. If I went to the last decade, there was a general, I felt more of a positivity in New York, because that's
Mhm.
kind of what that's the experience. To now, it's totally different. It's not a happy place, and
Yeah,
so we're fortunate to live in Canada in a place where it doesn't get too wild, right? I mean, there's enough sort of reason um, and sort of sanity that kind of brings it down to a level in which we can all kind of get along. And I think that, again, back to the beauty of Canada. That's what makes Canada awesome.
yeah, I agree with that. And on the topic of people, there's a little bit more to say. It's such a unique system we have here where the citizens of Canada come from all over the world. It's not like a place such as Japan where people there are predominantly Japanese. In Canada, being Canadian can mean anything. You can be from any part of the world, and this diversity is really a beautiful thing. People are bringing their strengths and their talents from everywhere, and we're putting it together and creating a beautiful system. And this point here is actually interesting to me because America, they actually have a similar product. People from all over the world, not not the being American can mean a plethora of different things, but the way it's been translated is different. This is actually one of the sources of polarization. So when people don't have a shared culture or a shared vision, that creates tension. In Canada, though, luckily, even though people come from all over the world, we do have this shared culture. You've touched on it: being respectful, being kind, not letting politics take over your life completely to the point where you're becoming enemies with each other. And these, I would say, are core values, and other things too, like having free healthcare, accessible education, a high quality of life. These are all things that we can rally around. But in the States, even these basics, they're not shared in the culture. Things like healthcare, heavily divided. Things like education, heavily
Mhm.
divided. Gun rights, even the very basis of your society is controversial. When that happens, it creates further rifts. And I'm just happy in Canada, we seem to have an underlying framework that allows us to come together despite coming from all over the world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, agreed. Like what you said, it's the surface stuff, right?
Mhm.
So those surface things in Canada, they're generally agreed upon, right? They don't make people divided quite as much, right? It's something that there's a middle ground where we can discuss. I would say there's a lot of gray area.
Mhm.
So it's like, you agree with this, I agree with that, but at the end of the day, we can kind of find that middle ground and get in there, and it's not an issue. Where in the States, like you said, I mean, just the general surface stuff, people can't even agree on. Um, so it's quite a battle, Like it does make you appreciate being in Canada for sure, and we'll see where that goes. I mean, United States compared to Canada, obviously there's a history of racism, but of course the level is quite different.
Yeah.
Um, the United States has such a strong sort of past of sort of discrimination, even to this day. It's kind of like it's woven into society. And so I think they get more magnified the more people become polarized, right? So
Yeah. Mhm.
um, where here in Canada, it's not as heavy, I would say. So we don't really look back on it quite as, intensely.
Mhm.
Whereas, anybody in the States can revert back to a certain time and feel sorry for themselves and go, oh, this happened to me and this happened to our culture and our group or whatever. Whereas in Canada, it's less so. So, it doesn't have quite as a checkered history. Um, that's a mentality thing. I don't know what you think about that, but, the whole victimhood thing, uh, I think that's a general thing. What's your opinion about that? Have you seen that? Do you feel that at all? Or,
I definitely don't get that sense too strongly in Canada. I feel like in the States, obviously, it's very different. I don't have too much experience with
Mhm.
interacting with that kind of mindset in America. But to me, people in Canada are willing to put these things aside for the most part. Obviously, there are histories of atrocities going back to the dawn of humanity, and these things should be recognized. They should be corrected for. But there's a distinction to be made based on what's happened to you and what's happening now. It's hard to quantify the impacts of injustices that happened in the past. Virtually every group has struggled in some form or another. And in Canada, I feel like we're able to rationally talk about that. We're able to talk about our grievances, things that we feel have hindered us, and we're able to be heard. People are willing to listen in Canada, and it's a two-way street. We're trying to find the middle ground. So luckily, I don't feel like it's such a big deal over here. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. And then I've noticed too, being in Toronto, there's a lot of protest,
Mhm.
and I have my opinions about that, but of course we all have the right to protest. We have the right to disagree. And it's weird in a funny way, as much as there are certain things that I disagree about, some protests, it's actually kind of a good thing because people can kind of stand up and, fight for what's important to them. I mean, I don't really see any issue with, um, people feeling strongly about certain issues. And I think we should all be expressing that, right? So, that kind of leads into the free speech thing, right? So my thing is I'm very defensive of free speech. I think that generally all speech, in my opinion, and I'd like to hear what you think, but generally, as long as you're out there, you're not making threats or you're not physically harming anyone,
Hmm.
the non-aggression principle. As long as you're kind of out there and you're just expressing your thoughts, I think that's actually generally a good thing because it kind of separates, the real nasty folk from kind of just the general, people that standing up for what they believe in. So I've seen a lot of protests, and I think that's good that
Yeah.
people are involved, right? Like people do care.
Hmm.
What's your,
Yeah.
what's your take on that?
So I'll comment on the protesting thing first.
Okay.
I like the way you've described it. So there are certain things that you don't agree with that are being protested, but you still support the right to protest.
Yeah.
This is the fundamental ideology that everyone has to have. Just because someone is using a right that they have in a way that you don't deem fit, it doesn't mean that you have to take away the right entirely. And once again, I know we're relating it back to America, but what I'm seeing over there is that once someone uses a right afforded to them in a manner that displeases you, people are quick to want to cancel it. They want to shut down the entire thing. It's no longer about the idea per se, but about the system that allows them to exhibit the idea. So with the protest thing, of course, there's going to be protests that you wouldn't agree with, but as long as we're all on the same page that people have the right to protest, then we're good. It's actually a good thing you disagree with it. You can have that dialogue, but as long as we're not attacking the people's rights, I think we're on the same page about that. And that's really one of the beauties of Canada as well, that you do have the freedom to do this, and you're not going to be completely demonized by the society at hand, unless you do something stupid. Like some of these rail protests, people are going off
Mm.
the handle and destroying public property. That's a whole different question there. There are right ways to protest and wrong ways, but at essence, you should still be able to protest to get your idea across. And now the notion of freedom of speech, I agree with you. This is one of the highest values of a society. And the real question is, what's the limiter? Because there are already laws in place that do limit your freedom of speech, and you alluded to that. So you can't threaten people, you can't lie about people overtly. These are things that you can be taken to court for, and you can be fined, or you can even go to jail for doing these kind of things. And there's a whole other gray area here where there exist mean things to say. This is really what's becoming the issue with freedom of speech. People are wondering, where can we draw the line and who gets to draw it? To me, the answer is never the government. That's what people are referring to with the government passing moral laws to restrict your speech. To me, that's a terrible idea. The people who should be the arbiters of control is the society. We should deem for ourselves what's acceptable and what's not. Freedom of speech, the protection is against the government. If you go into the streets and say something heinous and people don't want to interact with you, if you're shunned by society, if you become an outcast, that's a proper response to saying something outlandish. It shouldn't be the government throwing you in jail, because once you hand them that power, anything can go wrong. You can see that in China. You have scientists who are talking about the coronavirus. The government doesn't want that. They don't want the facts to be exposed. And because you gave them the power to control speech, they're going to use it in the ways that they deem fit. It's no longer society who holds the cards anymore. To me, it's a slippery slope, and we have to be aware of that. That's my take on the freedom of speech issue.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Yeah, and I want to add to that too. It's just like you said, it's where's the line drawn, right? Because obviously there are things that are clear as day that, well, I mean, yeah, they're generally not right. I mean, threatening and of course physical violence is a no-no, and that's okay, right? You should be persecuted for that, for you should be criminalized for that. But like what if I walk in the street and I say like unicorns are awesome
Mhm,
or something like that, just generally, and then people don't like what I have to say, right? And
mhm,
then somehow the government comes in and deems that as a hateful thing,
mhm.
right? Then at what point can I actually be free? I mean, how can I actually exist if I just have a general conversation, right? So, like you said, when there's too much government power, there's no sort of limit to what can be done. And so, I think another thing that makes Canada great is that it's not China.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Like it's not China, and
Mhm,
it kind of sounds funny to say, but something as terrible as this coronavirus thing that's kind of getting massive attention, and I guess rightfully so, right?
Mhm.
It kind of sheds light on why we don't want to be like that. Like why the country does not want to be like a China, right?
Yeah, for sure. And
Because yeah,
mhm. I actually just want to add a bow to this topic here because I feel like we glanced over this, but people are wondering what is the benefits of freedom of speech or freedom of expression in Canada? Like, why should it even be upheld? What's your answer to that?
yeah. Well, I mean, why? Because first of all, it's a God-given right. So let's start with that. Um, just from the basics, the nitty-gritty. But in my opinion, I think it's healthy to express yourself, right? And I think I pointed out earlier when you get a group of people, let's say you get a bunch of people, and one person's out there screaming stuff, right, with their free speech, and they're really nasty, right? And then there's another person out there with their free speech, and they say certain things, and you realize, you know what, they're all right. I mean, they're saying things that I don't necessarily love, but I'm not totally put off by. You're able to distinguish between kind of the nasty and the not the fine people basically and the good people. You can really differentiate kind of who you want to be hanging out with and who you're supposed to take seriously. But once you eliminate that free speech possibility, you don't actually know who's decent and who's kind of a piece of shit. If you don't mind me saying. So I mean that's kind of important to be able to distinguish, right? It's just we need to lay everything out on the line and kind of get a sense of what we're dealing with. And also I think it's therapy. I think it's generally healthy to be able to express yourself. I don't believe repression is good for anyone. And I don't think changing the semantics of a word is necessarily going to change the person's real opinions or the behavior. And so therefore, it should be allowed. I mean, you sort of harped on the free speech thing, but uh, I just think it's a God-given right, and nobody can really take it from us. At the basics of it all.
Yeah, like for me, when I look at the basics, I regard freedom of speech as simply a tool and one that we use to navigate this realm of ideas. It's actually,
Mm,
I'd actually argue the only thing that allows us to progress freely as a society. So this is what it's fundamentally for. It's to make sure that there isn't an oppressive power that's pushing upon you an agenda. Once you do that, you enter the world of stagnation. If the government or an advocacy group tells me that I cannot think in a certain way and what they are saying has to be held as a dogma, that's it. The conversation is over, and with that comes no room for improvement. I can't look at the idea and think, oh, maybe we can do this better or that better. Or maybe it's a stupid idea in the first place. These thoughts become off limits to you. And of
mm,
course, that might be appropriate in some circumstances, but you don't know. And the people making the rules are the ones who get to decide that for you. For me, as a society, we have the power to make that choice ourselves. And without this freedom of speech going on, one group is going to have the power to push upon the populace what they believe. We will no longer be able to have a dialogue anymore, and it's just going to
yep,
be a one-way street. There's no progress in that, and no good ideas will be able to thrive, first of all. And second, you run the risk of having bad ideas take over your society, and that's terrible. We've seen the consequences of things like this throughout history. Marxism is fundamentally a terrible idea. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but we can see the instances of its application where it goes wrong because nobody is able to talk about it. You can look at Russia, you can look at China, you can look at Cambodia. When these leaders come into power and they shut down the populace from being able to rebel against the thoughts that they're pushing against people, then you have no recourse. Nothing is able to stop them from going forward and bulldozing you with their ideas. To me, that's why it's important. It's the tool we use to navigate. And fundamentally, people have two ways of dealing with conflict. Number one is to talk about it, have a discussion, and reach an agreement. Number two is violence. That's really it. Those are the two modes that we have to go about the exchange of ideas. If you shut down the communication process, what do you expect people to do in as a result of that? To me, it's disastrous either way.
yeah. Actually, yeah. You kind of finished my point for me. Yeah, oh, for sure. I'm totally against Marxism, and yeah, it's like you said, it's the alternative, right? I mean, if we can't discuss ideas in a rational manner, and we can't agree and disagree about things in our society that are ours to deal with. Um, this is why you get violence, right? I mean, if you can't actually discuss it through reason and rationality, I mean, you just get, you get sticks and all that. You get people fighting each other, and we don't want that. So I hear you, man. You finished my thoughts for me on that one for sure.
Yeah, and it's just not the most productive way to organize a society. So we've established that we both don't like Marxism, but if you came on, because we didn't talk about this before, if you came in just now and told me, oh, wait, I actually do like Marxism, I wouldn't kick you off my show. I wouldn't try to censor you. I'd want to hear we have to say, because this
Yeah,
is just the possibility of life. I could actually be wrong about this, and you might know something that I don't know. I can't be so entrenched in my own ideology that I become blind to reason, as you put it. You have to hold reason in the highest regard. And there's a chance you might be right about something, and we can hear that. And if it turns out that you're wrong about it, well, then I can prove that by having this dialogue, and the people can be the judge of what they want to think for themselves. I think that's the fundamental distinction here. I don't feel like I have to baby people and force them into believing something. I think I can show them the rational progression of my thoughts, and they can decide for themselves. It's a free country.
yeah. And just to add to that too, it's also a point of understanding, right?
Mhm.
So when you kind of have these disagreements and discussions, you actually start to sort of respect the other person's point of view, and you can sort of learn to respect the other person. And so I think that's really key. Just to have it out in the open. It's just generally a productive thing, and we can sort of improve upon society, and we can actually improve relationships when we learn how to debate and discuss. And there are things like you said that you'll agree with and you'll disagree with, but as long as it's out there, I don't see that as a negative.
Yeah, 100%. And these things shouldn't be grounds for not communicating. Like we touched on before, you shouldn't just be instantly enemies with someone who thinks differently than you. This is one of
Yeah.
the this is one of the good things about diversity, having a difference of opinion and learning from each other. And we've talked about the people of Canada, which I agree with you, makes Canada very good. To me, there's also another part of it, and it's just the structure of society in general. So Canada is a free country. We are democratic. We have strong capitalist frameworks, and at the same time, we have very strong social programs in place for people who end up falling towards the bottom of the hierarchy in capitalism. People who are down on their luck, who need some help. We have programs to assist you with that. It seems like we have a pretty ideal balance going on here, just from a structural standpoint. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't complain. I mean, obviously, with the people, there's a lot of social programs and people that are really concerned about the poor and the people that are down on their luck. So I guess in my neighborhood in Ontario, you definitely see a lot of concern from people for the homeless and the people that I think are suffering from mental illness too at the same time. So I think there's a healthy balance. It's not an all or nothing approach, and I think that worked over time. I think that's why people really appreciate the country, because it's just not either or. It's not just a black and white situation. It's really the gray area situation again. It's sort of finding the middle ground, finding a way to help others. Um, I don't see a disdain for people that make money. I've never come across that. You want to be more of a capitalist. That's fine, but there's also a way to do it where you can make money and give back and be socially conscious in that sense. So I think there's a fine balance, and I think that's why people love Canada. It's because there is the balance. Whereas again, comparing to the states, there's not so much a balance. Um, that's what you're seeing now. The balance is kind of getting tipped with the polarization.
Yeah, the balance is really key. Like whenever I talk about capitalism, this is my slogan for it. It's the best war system that we have, and that's to say every other single system that we have is far worse than capitalism, but capitalism isn't perfect and it shouldn't be confused as me saying it is. So one of the downsides of capitalism is the hierarchy.
Yep.
There are certain people with whatever it's going to be, luck or the skills to climb the hierarchy at an accelerated rate. And once you get to the top and you accumulate wealth, the richer you are, the easier it is to get further riches. Like success is an exponential growth curve. It's not just straight. The higher you get, the easier it is for you to climb. And I would say the opposite's true too. The poorer you get, the easier it is for you to remain poor and stay there. So based on that, people who climb to the top relatively have an easier time staying there and gaining more market share. You can see that with how wealth is being accumulated. I believe it's something like the 10 richest people have more wealth than the bottom 40% of the entire global population. And that's probably going to continue to grow because they have so many assets that they can use to just better themselves. That's a downside of capitalism. The downside of communism is people just start dying left, right, and center. And fascism
Yeah,
is full on war and whatnot. So you have
yeah,
to pick and choose what you want to have here. And despite that, we recognize, as you said, there's a balance. We recognize the downsides to capitalism. There are people who stack up at the bottom, whether justly or unjustly. And as a result, we do have these social programs to help them. It's about making sure that people are treated fairly and we ensure a livable standard of life for all of our citizens. That's a beautiful thing.
yeah. I mean, just to add to that, funny because then you talked about the actual structure of capitalism, right? And the one thing that I would say that is a negative, and I think it's negative everywhere, obviously, is just the monopoly. I think you really crystallized it. If you just want to add more to that too, but I would just say the monopoly in Canada is pretty egregious. It's pretty bad. And when it comes to the telecommunications company, that's kind of where that's just one of the examples where it's really bad in terms of people getting ripped off with the phone bills and
Hmm.
the cable bills, right? Because of the telecommunications company. You want to add a little more because I think that's a negative of having a massive monopoly in Canada.
Yeah, like I am 100% against monopolies. I actually think that there's an argument to be made that monopolies are contrary to capitalism itself because there is no free market exchange here. It's just people who are
Mhm.
fixing prices and working together. So I'm sure people are aware. In Canada, there's really three major telecoms who own a bunch of subsidiaries. They make you think there's competition, but things like Kudo, Virgin, Fido, they're all owned by the big three, Rogers, Bell, and Telus. And because they understand that there isn't really that many players to choose from, they're able to outsmart the people. They look at each other and they say, hey, why compete ourselves into the ground? We can obviously do the price war, and that probably will reduce our plans to what, $10 a month or something like that. How about we just collude? They're going to do it implicitly where it's not obvious because they don't want to get busted by the courts, but they're able to get away with this because all they're saying is, hey, here is a threshold that you should set your prices around. Maybe for 10 gigs, we're going to charge in the ballpark of $80 to $100. And we all have a subsidiary that's supposed to be a budget company. For those guys, we'll make it 60 to 70. And this way, consumers don't really have a choice. It's basically a shot in the dark. And they're going to pick one of us, not because they think that one is better, but because that's all that there is there. It's the same plan for the same product at the same price. And as a result, they're able to rake in these outrageous profits. $80 for a phone plan that really should only cost you $15 and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's really crystallized by the fact that you can just look around the world. There are developing countries who have comparable service as in Canada, but the prices are rock bottom. $5 a month will get you things like unlimited call, text, and data in some places, but in Canada, that'd be $100 a month. It's crazy.
Now, is that true? So you're saying that in other places you can actually get it that low?
Yeah, you can because the thing with these services, if you think about it from a business standpoint, there are a lot of fixed costs here, but the variable costs aren't that high. For me to add one person to my network, there really isn't too much of a cost to me, but they're charging you as if there is. Once you establish the cellular tower, adding more and more people to it isn't really coming at a dramatic cost. You're not losing a bunch of money for getting that person on. As a result, you're actually able to offer a relatively cheap price to them. It's not like you're creating a product. For example, if you're building a car, you have to pay for metal and the engine every single time that you sell a car. It's not like you're buying a new cellular tower each time. It's not like a finite resource per se. And as a result, things should just be cheaper. But there is no competition that enables that.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say just to add to the whole sort of structure thing, yeah, we should be focusing, like you said, we should be focusing on improving real capitalism. I think that would be a worthwhile thing to do for every Canadian. It's to sort of hold these big companies accountable and try to use the right to protest and really get that attention towards these things because with the decency of Canadian, there is the ability to be taken advantage of, and I think that's the tragedy of it. I mean, like you said, the monopolies and just you know raising the prices like that is just totally unfair. And obviously, there are going to be inequalities in terms of who makes what. That's just going to be the case. But in this instance, it's completely unnatural. I mean, it's rude,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm, mhm.
so this is a thing that's worth for people to think about how do we attack crony capitalism? How do we attack, the pseudo capitalism? It's not the real thing. Um,
Yeah,
you have to make
100%.
sure that there's more competition. That's why I think it's great with your show. It's that you provided a platform, and it's great that you're actually able to have it. Because the more competition we have, first of all, give more opportunity to just regular citizens that want to start their own businesses, start their own shows, and we get differing of opinions, we get diversity of opinions, like you said, and then also we have a chance to, make our own wealth and not be completely reliant upon these big companies, right? Because I mean, a lot of us are really beholden to these big companies, the Shaws and the Telluses. I got rid of my cable bill, the cable company, and
Mhm.
I just went with the alternative. Do you know of CarryTel? Like CarryTel is an alternative in Toronto.
No, no, I
Um,
haven't heard of them before.
yeah, yeah. So CarryTel, actually a friend recommended it, and it's great. I mean, it's a cheaper. You get Wi-Fi and the phone plan. So we have to look and support the alternative, and that's one of the ways to you know, stop these big monopolies from happening, right?
Yeah,
Where
100%.
we have to try to not pay into these things, right? Because we're only reinforcing this stuff. So the power is up to us. I mean, we have the ability with these protests, with rejecting certain things and bad ideas, and also bad behavior. It's up to the people to say, "Hey, enough." Like we can't have that. And part of that, again, it's all linked, but a part of that is with that free speech, like you said. Um, it's there for us to protest against that and say no to certain things because you have to be able to put aside the bad stuff and focus on what's actually productive and improve society. You know.
Yeah, for sure. And since we're on the topic of capitalism too, this is one area where I think Canada has room to evolve. Looking at the future, it's very clear that we're going to be facing some type of employment shortage given things like technological advances in AI. And we have to prepare for that. We have to start thinking about how we're going to face a society where there are a lot of people who don't have skills that are employable anymore. And this is where I think Andrew Yang had a point. UBI is very interesting. I don't think they have the entire thing fleshed out, arriving at $1,000 per month or whatever. There's a lot of math and data you need to take in to make these choices. But at a fundamental level, these are where these are ideas where Canada should be looking towards and investing some type of resource because these are problems that are on the horizon and they're fast approaching. If it's not handled and the estimates come true, where something along the lines of 30 to 40% of Canada's population just can't be employed anymore, that's going to be disastrous. So yeah, that's where I think capitalism has to head. A more, I think Andrew Yang calls it like human focused capitalism, a smarter way of going about this monetary exchange that makes sure that ensures a certain level of livable standard for people. That's a conversation that I think has to be had now. And I'm not really seeing too much of it though. That's an unfortunate thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, to add to that, I mean, what I'd say, the reason why you're not seeing much of it, or I think so far, I think hopefully that it starts to show a little more that people have to stand up and they have to think about the idea. They got to think about what actually is going to be productive for society. And as far as I can see, conscious capitalism, whatever you want to call it, I just say capitalism, period. And it has to be, my main focus would be just increase the competition. Get it out there, and you have to really get people in the mindset of starting their own businesses, trying to create their own products, and working that way, right? So I believe entrepreneurship is the best way to sort of handle, the societal things and getting rid of the monopoly. I think that's a tremendous thing that people, we can do, right? Because um, these guys are in control. These big companies, not just telecommunications companies, right? It's the other companies too. I saw the airlines are also having a monopoly, believe it or not. So, um, to add also, I mean, people are getting laid off for work. I mean, it's happening pretty consistently. And now with the coronavirus, it's a trickle down effect, right? So I think everyone's going to start feeling the crunch, unfortunately. But I would say we have to focus on entrepreneurship and sort of trying to create value. I think that would be key. It's not only just financial; it's mental.
Mm.
I don't know what your opinion on that, but to me, it's a mentality. I mean, obviously, if you're crawling through this alleyway, I mean, looking for food, I mean, it's not just mentality. It's obviously economically you can't do much, but I think it's the mentality that we have to focus on, and sort of the self-esteem, and to be able to sort of stand out there and create your own worth and create your own value. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I never really
Yeah,
considered entrepreneurship to be the solution to the impending AI revolution and whatnot. I want to let's talk about that. Let's stay on that for a second. I
yeah,
think it's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So my question would be, first of all, is do you actually think that entrepreneurship is going to be the predominant tool that will enable people to still make money and live, given this AI takeover?
Well, I mean, the thing is AI takeover. I mean, we're utilizing technology right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I do, it's tough because, I don't know what goes on in every household. I don't know, what every parent is telling their kid, right? But, you know, again, we can go deeper into this, but, it's sort of like the parenting and, how do we raise the kid to go, what, I want to create my own businesses. I don't want to be reliant on a company. I don't want to just do the routine 9 to 5. I'm going to find a way to make coin. One way or another, I'm going to find a way to sell myself. So to me, obviously, it's not the only thing. I mean, there has to be some reasonable measures that are taken, and I think the reasonable measure to get rid of monopolies, and there's the tax issue, right? Obviously, um, the tremendous tax on people, small businesses in Canada, and that makes it very demoralizing, and that's why I refer to the mentality.
Mm.
Um, I think with all the abundance that we have, and I understand what you're saying, that the AI and it's coming in and it's taken over, but at the same time, it's how you utilize the AI too, right? If people can't think for themselves and they can't create for themselves and they can't start businesses, they're always going to be privy to whatever happens in society, right? So people have to learn how to think for themselves and actually step out the box. And I know it's tough, right? Because it's not, I don't think it's the majority of the population that think that way, but um, I think that's the way out of it because we have so much abundance, right? So as bad as things can be, it's never been better now.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So for me, two things come to mind hearing this. The first thing is the degree of certainty, and the second thing is resources, actually, as you mentioned. So the first point to me is the reason why I lean towards something like a UBI as being a more practical solution is because it's a certainty. Everyone's getting a certain payment per month that's going to enable you to just survive, maybe at a baseline level, and you'll be okay. You'll be taken care of. Corporations will be able to maximize output via these technological advances, and we'll reap the benefits of that. Entrepreneurship is interesting because I feel like in a perfect society, that would be a good solution. But there's such a high level of uncertainty here that I fear that people will be just left in the rut if something goes backwards. Like if their company fails, what happens to them? They're going to be placed in what, unemployment insurance or something. And what if at
Mhm.
the same time, what if you don't even have the resources to begin or get a company started? Because a lot of things that we're seeing now, like layoffs and whatnot, are making it difficult for you to even be in a position to take that chance, for you to take your savings and to build the company. That comes with a certain degree of responsibility, and it's heightened if you have like a family or something like that. Like, how would you handle these type of considerations?
Yeah, that's a great point, man. Well, I mean, that's why we discuss, right? Because you're making me think for sure. I mean, the one thing about just handing out the coin, right? You said a
Mhm.
thousand, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't know. Again, because it comes down to me, it does come down to the mentality of some people or their behavior, right? I mean, if we just start distributing that, and maybe the person's a drug addict, or maybe they don't can't get their life together properly. I mean, that money goes to waste anyways. Um, so that's kind of one of the things I noticed too. If you just give a baseline, a kind of who is really going to step outside the box and make it happen, right? I mean, no matter what, it would be a smaller amount. But when you sort of make it, evened out, it kind of, takes away the motivation. And I'm not entirely sure if that's what it is. I mean, employment insurance would still be there, right? Presumably.
Presumably not. Actually, it's interesting. Like the from what I'm seeing with the proposals, that UBI is it. They're going to erase pretty much every other social safety net and just give you the UBI
Yeah.
because the UBI is supposed to be able to allow you to sustain yourself. So things like the employment insurance and welfare, the baby bonus, all that would be gone. And it'd be used to fund the UBI. So that would just be it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, actually, if you get rid of welfare, um, I actually like that.
Mhm.
I think that's actually I know it sounds, some people go, oh my goodness, you want to get rid of welfare. But yeah, I think that actually might be more beneficial if you substitute it. But again, you're still substituting one thing for another. And I think it just sounds nicer, supposedly, right? I'm still not entirely sold just because I don't trust that every single person with no knowledge, no ability, and we don't know sort of what the family unit is like in the first place, that they're going to actually use the money wisely. And that's the concern. I mean, what if people just start buying booze with all that money?
Yeah, it's interesting. So for me, the problem is, so let's take the example of the addict that we've talked about here. It's how would they be without the UBI and how would they be with it? Without the UBI, they'd probably be in an equally bad situation or maybe even worse, such as homeless or something like that. The UBI isn't meant to correct your behaviors per se. That's more of like a philosophical type of revelation that we need to have with ourselves. It's meant to
Mm,
just keep you alive or give you some type of shelter so you can actually buy food. You'll have your addiction presumably still. The UBI isn't the defining characteristic of elevating you beyond that, but it's just meant to make sure that you can actually survive in an environment where there are so many skills that are just no longer needed. In the future, presumably, engineering and coding are going to be the top job level performances people look for. But outside of that, it becomes kind of murky. We don't even know if we'll need things like doctors anymore once we can create a robot to diagnose you. And it's interesting. I think you're touching on something where it's a very philosophical conversation. It's what happens to the human soul when you lack purpose. Because right now, a lot of people derive purpose from things like employment or having a business or doing
mhm.
something like that. And let's say that that's not possible for a good chunk of the population. What do we do? Obviously, we don't want you to die. We want you to be able to survive. You need income, but you can't get that from work. So maybe the UBI is that. But now what happens? Now what do you do with your time? One thing you could do is, as you said, start a business. But what if you can't do that? And it just comes down to that question: like, what do we want our society to look like in the future?
Yeah, man, it is a fascinating topic, right? Because it's so complex. Like, I'm not saying that I have the complete answer. I don't fully know, but you know, it's just kind of what you harped on. You can't tell whether the person's going to take that money for addiction and blow it all and all that. But again, I guess the thing that I kind of find troublesome in a sense is, you pass that money down. There's no guarantee that that's going to be the safeguard. I mean, you can't depend upon that, right? So I think wouldn't we be better focused on providing housing and shelter? You know what I mean? Like if we put that money, which has already taken place, I think there's a lot of emphasis on trying to provide shelter for people that are homeless. Then you don't have to worry about the evenly distributed income, basically, every month. You already have the shelter. That's what the basics we're talking about, right? And in terms of starting a business, I mean, maybe it brings people together. Maybe people can work together and think up some stuff, and obviously the select few that are, let's just say, brighter or they're more motivated or they're going to work harder, maybe they can really push that business. And obviously there will be an inequality, but again, it's the same with the capitalism, but that inequality just, it trickled down to the quote unquote poorer people. So, again, I don't fully know the answer. I don't think, I mean, obviously that's why we're discussing it. I mean, no one fully knows the perfect answer. I mean, if I was going to tell you, I would say we should focus on entrepreneurial stuff and just simply just get back to capitalism. But again, it's hard to take care of every single person, right? That's the trouble.
Yeah, it's an interesting solution. It's proposing more capitalism to respond to this AI thing. I'm just wondering if there's even room for that. I wonder how many, first of all, skill sets will even be needed, like businesses. If
I know.
yeah,
Yeah,
get,
it's fascinating, right? It's fascinating, but I guess where I disagree a little bit with you,
mhm,
and so just a little bit, it's just the AI part, because as much as the AI replaces and it already is, right? I mean, you go to your local, if you go to a Shoppers or you go to the No Frills and the Loblaws or whatever, you got the automatic checkout, right?
mhm.
But first of all, that's very useful for us. It saves us time, right? It's quick. Obviously, the person that's not working to help us with that, but um, there are ways that AI can actually, the technology can be beneficial. I just think with all this abundance, it's not as much of a doomsday thing. It's more of a positive. I just think I know it's uncertainty, but if you get past the uncertainty part, I think there's room for a lot of creativity. And I think so. To me, to fill in that gap would be focus on entrepreneurial stuff. Maybe start teaching kids about entrepreneurship a little earlier. Again, I think it's more of a philosophical thing, and it's at the root of all of this. It's the parenting, it's the behavioral stuff, and then that way, people can really become independent, and they're not. I think the thing that worries me is the equal distribution is dependency. That's the thing that concerns me a bit. It's fully dependent on handouts, essentially, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point. To me, it's a question of I wonder if dependency is a necessity at that point. Like I agree with you that
Yeah.
AI isn't necessarily a doomsday item. I'm actually quite optimistic about what could happen in our future. But you asked a very interesting question. So it's like who benefits from this AI? So the consumer it does in some capacity, but to me the real answer is the corporations are the ones benefiting the most from it.
Mm.
My idea with something like a UBI would be you see the cost savings of McDonald's or Loblaws for not having to pay somebody $15 an hour, $30,000 a year, whatever it works out to be. They can just buy one machine and let it do that job. And there's no downtime. There is some maintenance, but you're not paying benefits. You're not doing whatever. So it's a massive cost savings and it's an efficiency thing. So the corporation is reaping a massive benefit. At the same time, it seems to me society is going to suffer via things like job loss. For me, UBI has to be funded via that delta by that
Mm.
deficit. So you
Yep.
try to quantify just how much the corporation is benefiting from these AI technological advances, and you add a tax that is reflective of that. You don't strip them entirely of profit, but you say, hey, because you have this
Mm.
tech and you're not hiring people, you're making X% more. We're going to take a piece of that and we're going to use that money to give back to society because you seem to not have a use for a lot of them anymore. But even the corporation still relies on the people. That's the customer base. If we let that relationship falter, then it's game over for everyone. People don't have
Mm-hmm.
money to even take advantage of these systems. So to me, it's just a balance of trying to find out how to circulate money, and that's kind of the
Yep.
I have. But there's obviously a lot of different ways to go about doing it.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that point up. I think that's not bad. I mean, again, Amazon's also part of a monopoly too, right? Um, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Like Amazon, these
Which
big.
monopoly would you think Amazon's part of?
Oh well, I mean, just cornering off the market, the retail market, right? So it's like people don't even go into the local stores quite as much, right? So that's why you do see stores going out of business because they can't compete, right? It's the whole thing with Facebook too, right? Where Facebook just buys out everyone that creates a cool concept or an app, right? So um, there's just a cornering of that market completely. And I don't disagree. I think that might be a good concept where you can say, hey, we're going to tax you, but this is going to be um, it's almost like what kind of tax would you call it? Like
I would
what
call
would be the
it
name
simply
for
an
it?
efficiency tax.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I mean, there's already enough taxes for things that are kind of ridiculous out there, right?
Mhm.
So that's not a bad idea. Actually, that's something that I could get with. And you know what? I mean, realistically, people in the corporation say, well, you don't have the right to tell me what I can do, blah blah blah, right? But I mean, if they're gonna be charitable, and obviously you want it to be voluntary, but I mean, is it really that bad to be charitable in that way? I mean, is it really a horrible thing? I mean, I think that's a pretty good idea.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting because a lot of these questions are
yeah,
like very philosophical, right? It's like what can
yeah,
and can't you use. So it's not even just business decisions,
yeah,
economics. A lot of these things are just
yeah,
so interconnected. But it looks like we're getting to the end of our time, man. I really enjoyed our conversation. Do you have anything you want to say before we wrap up?
yeah, man. I just say Canada is awesome, and I think we should all appreciate it. And I think the thing is, we have to be nice to each other. We have to treat each other well, and I think that's really the key. I think that's what really makes Canada awesome. Is we go back to the original point. Is just that's where we can separate ourselves as a country, where we really respect each other regardless of views. And I think that's why people come here and they're very happy to be here because they feel welcomed. And I think that's what we should focus on. And these other issues are just part of general society, and we work them out. So yeah, Canada's great, and I really appreciate you having me on the show. And I guess vice versa, because I'm going to release
Yeah.
this too on mine.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'll do a plug for you. So I think everybody should check out the Perry platform. And if you're really interested in alternative media and you get some sort of nitty gritty facts, and not just from the mainstream media, CBC and CTV or whatever you want to, whatever station you tune into, you can really get some interesting information that makes you think. Because I think it's important to think and to think about how we can improve things and how we can make our lives better. So I think your platform does that.
Yeah, thanks so much, and vice versa too. I heavily recommend everyone to check out Jake's show. As you can see from our conversation here, he has a lot of good ideas, very well spoken, and it's always a joy to talk. So thanks again for coming.
You got it, man. Thank you. Thank you for your time.